Can I also just begin by saying, if you look at the colour of my hair, I've been around this thing for community development a long time. Believe it or not, this is the 50th year that I have worked in community development in a paid role. I was a young uni graduate when 50 years ago I had to get a job. And my job was working with what now is the city of Melville, running in their old chambers building what became known as the gas chambers. It was a youth drop-in centre, and I was employed to work 10 hours a week as the youth worker who was running this particular drop-in centre. I worked under an amazing guy who's still alive called Tully Talenta, who was the youth ed officer at kind of like Melville High School. And I always remember when I started in this job, he gave me 4 simple pieces of advice. Your job is to make everybody a somebody. Secondly, don't do anything for anyone they can do for themselves. Thirdly, don't do anything to anyone that they don't want. And finally, connect people to the heart of community, not to the heart of your programs and services. Amazing bit of advice 50 years ago. And I'll always remember the incredible mentorship that Tully gave me. And I did remember that for a while. But then I went on to become a youth education officer in the ed department, firstly at Applecross High School and then at Rockingham High School. I went to the university and set up all the youth work courses here in WA. And then I was recruited into the new Labor government, the Brian Burke government, to develop the state's youth employment strategy. And I found myself the youngest director in the state system, the Director for Employment, which I did for almost a decade. And I suppose what I found is that I began to forget about that simple advice. I began to realise that, you know, maybe I was there to do things to community, and I was certainly there wanting to help communities. And so very much I found myself getting caught up in a program where so much of our energy was about doing things to and for community. Occasionally we would try to do things with community, but rarely was a lot of our efforts about trying to create space where people in community did things of and by themselves. And I suppose as I got older and I entered now into the last stage of my working life, I'm back to seeing that what really matters in people's lives is really that bottom quadrant. We as professionals love to help people. We love to do things to and for community. And sometimes we really do get excited about doing a thing with. But what I've increasingly found, what makes the difference is where people in community themselves start to do things of and by themselves. And maybe increasingly our role is to open doors and windows where people can do it. Because as I look back over 50 years, the community I was raised in a public housing estate there in Hilton Park, down in Freo, the quality of life I knew, being brought up in a single parent family where the whole street looked after me. I had a mother that had to work long hours to provide for me. But you know what? I experienced that incredible African experience. It takes a whole community to raise a child. I had a sense of connection. But today, increasingly, I find, as we've been reminded already, community ain't what it actually used to be, despite all the effort, all the money, all the professionals, all this community development that goes on. We are now faced with a situation where certainly the Red Cross can say 1 in 4 people are lonely almost all the time. In fact, the statistic that we've had shared already is even more horrific. The fact that people kind of like are at each other's throats, people don't trust each other. The fact that only 1 in 3 people in Perth can tell you the name of their neighbours on either side, meaning that 2 out of 3 people can't. And the people actually now, according to Citizens Advice Bureau, more mediation now happens between neighbours than between family members and strangers. And the main reason why people don't trust each other is they don't know each other. The fact that Curtin can say that only 1 in 3 people actually trust their neighbours. What type of community have we created where we have really lost that sense of connection with each other? And then that horrific speech that our Minister for Aged Care said, that his department tells him that 40% of people in a nursing home never get a visitor. I had an opportunity of sitting and talking to Ken about that, and he said, Peter, I got that wrong. It's closer to 60%. 60% of people in a nursing home never get a visitor. What's happened to our sense of community? We wrap so many services and programs around people. I've reached the stage now that if we really want to build inclusion and connection, isn't it about beginning how we wrap community much more than our programs and our services around people? We do these polls that come out, and this one, for example, the 2018 Omni poll, saying that compared to the mid-80s, Australians now have 4 less people that they can actually count on, particularly when they need someone to have that particular support. Horrific. What has happened despite all these services and programs that we actually direct at people? And it's based on just simply asking those simple questions. And as one looks at those lines, we are seeing a systematic kind of like decline in people's connection with each other. And I'm one of those people who are saying, look, if we really care about this thing called community development, we've got to get back to looking at the basics, that really community development is fundamentally about relationship building. And how do we start building people's connection where they're actually at? Now, I and Ali, my younger daughter who's here, are passionate members of the Freo Docker footy team. Do we have any other intelligent people in the audience? Yeah, there's a few of us who've seen the light. And Ali and I go whenever we can, and we're members there, and we've got our seats at that new stadium and whatever. But it has actually been a bit of a sad 25-year history for the Docker team. We haven't quite made it. And certainly the last 2 years have been kind of like a real struggle in lots of ways. And I can remember sitting there when, again, we were thrashed, and there's been some big thrashings, and saying to Ali, who knows more about the game than I do and gets so much more passionate, and I think my role is to stop us slitting our wrists as we sit there and it's getting depressing. And I can remember at that last game, 2 bits of advice. Ali, we didn't lose again today, we just ran out of time. Didn't quite seem to help her. But the other bit of statement that I really think is important is simply this, that sitting there watching that game does remind me how we do community, where 30,000 people who need the exercise turn up to watch 36 players who don't. And it seems to me that while we still do this 2 and 4 stuff with community, rather than trying to look at how do we begin to get a lot more of that kind of like of and by the community themselves. And secondly, why are we still seeing people as recipients in community of what we actually do for them and the language we use? I don't know who in local government invented this thing that people now in local government are customers. What a crazy thing. Whoever did it should be strung up. Crazy. I tell people they're a customer, they will act like a customer. I am a ratepayer. You should be doing this for me. In the health department now, we call people consumers. Amazing. And us often in the community sector refer to people as clients. You know where the word client comes from? It comes from a Latin word meaning I'm lying on my back powerless and I need someone to help me up. You know, what we need are citizens, what we need are co-owners, co-producers of what's going on in their community. And so to me, increasingly, this recognition that unless people are active players, active participants, active contributors, we're not really building community. I love the definition of the World Health Organization about positive mental health. Pretty simple. Look at the words, a state of well-being in which an individual realises his or her kind of like abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. And I suppose the theme that I really want to push today is unless people are given and are encouraged to be contributors rather than just recipients and spectators in the process of building community, no inclusion really will go on. I love the words of Jody Kretzmann. Every single person has capacities, abilities, gifts and ideas, and leading a good life depends on whether those capacities can be used, abilities expressed, gifts given and ideas shared. We've got to begin, and I love the story that we have just had from the footy club. That's the type of model that we need to see. And really a strong community is a place that really makes that stuff kind of like come alive in terms of it. And so that's why when Denver and the Inclusion Solutions team asked me, what is it that really turns me on? I think it's simply that. My passion is communities where everyone matters, everyone contributes and belongs. And certainly to me, as I get older into the stuff, that is my simple goal. How do we enable that to increasingly begin to happen in terms of where we're at? So in closing, can I just share with you one story that's meant a lot to me? I just want to introduce to you my friend Emma. I met Emma for the first time back in March when I was running a masterclass on asset-based community development on the west coast of New Zealand in a place called Greymouth. There are about 40 in the class, and you quickly see as the session goes on, those people that you do want to keep staring at because you can see the passion and the smile, and boy, they're engaging with what you're on about. And Emma was one of those people in the audience. And come the break, Emma came up and said, Peter, I just love being here today. It's just reinforcing what I actually believe. This whole thing that everyone kind of like cares about something. Everyone has gifts. And the more I sit and listen to you, I think about what is it that I care about? And she said, you know what I care about, Peter? I care about good coffee, good cake, and good conversation. And what I would really love to see in my community of Granity, which is a little mining community on the west coast of 200 people, is the opportunity for that to happen more. We had a coffee shop once in our town, but it closed down. We have nowhere where we meet and interact. And I kept thinking as you talked about discovering what people care about, what people want to contribute, I thought, you know what I want to do? I want to actually initiate some space where people can enjoy good coffee, good cake, and good conversation. But then she said, Peter, I come though with some baggage. And she used that word. She said, Peter, I have two challenges in my life. One, the husband. He's the local copper in Granity. And there's an attitude towards local police that just makes it hard, often for me, to kind of like connect with other people. And secondly, she said, I do suffer badly from depression. She said, I have just come out of self-admitting myself to hospital for 2 weeks. I in a silly way, went on to the town face page and shared that I had a mental health challenge. And the result is now that a number of people in the community now call me the loony at the local police station. It didn't help to kind of like share that. And I want to see this happen, but you know what? The gatekeepers, and particularly one woman in the town, is the #1 person who calls me the loony at the cop station. I wouldn't be the person who could instigate this. I said, of course you are, Emma. You actually have something you're passionate about. You know what I'd be surprised though? That there isn't a pile of other people in the town who care about good coffee, good cake, and good conversation. Have you ever thought of going back on that website and putting out that you'd like to get together with people who might be willing to do something about that? You may be surprised. Anyway, the workshop continued on, and come 4 o'clock, we all went our different ways. 9:30 that night, I get this text. It's Emma. Peter, I've just gone on to the Granity Facebook site. I have put up the message. I love good cake, good coffee and good conversation. Anyone else? I'm putting on the best cake anyone's seen. And I know a whole heap of you would love to see what the police station looks like. So on Friday, I'm inviting anyone who wants to come at 2 o'clock Friday afternoon to have good cake, good coffee, and above all, good conversation about how that might become a more regular occasion in our community. And so Covering the no entry sign on the police station, she put up her own sign inviting people to come around in the backyard there of the police station and enjoy and come around to talk about community. You know, 13 people turned up out of a community of 200 and had that conversation. They began to talk about how could we get the coffee shop that closed down 3 years ago going. The reality is that was a pretty tough order. Whole pile of reasons why it closed. They didn't even know who owned it, and council obviously has got a list this long of rules and regulations and red tape to make it impossible. And what she said is, that mightn't be possible, but is there perhaps a much better fallback position? Someone said, well, listen, I'm actually on the local hall committee and you can rent the hall for $2.50 an hour. I'm sure if we put on a thing every Friday between 1 and 3, wouldn't cost as much, less than $10. And then someone else said, you know, I reckon a whole pile of people have got ex-engagement and wedding presents, tablecloths, tea things, china they've never used. I reckon if we go out to Facebook, a whole pile of people would be willing to give us some of that good stuff. And I reckon there's a whole pile of other people who'd be willing to share their gifts to put on good cake and come onto a roster. Someone from the church said, listen, we've got $100 in a little kitty that we haven't found a reason to use. We'd be happy to give that to kick the whole thing off. And so basically what happened is that afternoon, a group of people who had in common good cake, good conversation and good coffee decided to create community. That afternoon they did a simple asset map of what each of them could actually offer to make this thing actually happen. And people shared their gifts of the head, knowledge stuff, gifts of the hands, practical things, gifts of the heart, things that they actually cared about. And within 7 days, they opened the doors for community. That afternoon, 32 people out of that community of 200 turned up and started to kind of like share and enjoy each other's kind of like company and begin to discover it. A whole pile of people went onto a roster, so you only had to bake once in every 4. Other people offered to kind of like look after the door. Other people offered and said, you know what I've got the gift of washing up. I could actually do that. And so over the weeks, over the last kind of like what is fundamentally just 7 months, that little initiative in that community has grown. And each Friday now, on average, 90 people out of a community of 200 turn up to enjoy community with each other. And what they encourage is, like Emma, everyone has some gift and contribution. So one woman said, you know what, I'm a muso. I haven't played kind of like in a pub or anything for over 4 years, but I love the opportunity. And I wonder whether other people in the community have an instrument and something they can share. And so now about half a dozen people rotate and provide kind of like music and so on. And then someone once said, you know what, I haven't practiced hairdressing for over 10 years. I'd be willing in that room next door to the main thing in the foyer, anyone would like to have their hair done. And I only want to charge $5 to cover the stuff. And on an average Friday, she does 15 haircuts because that's her kind of like contribution and so on in terms of what it is and so on. And then a few other people said, you know what, we really love to put on a bit of drama. And this guy is into white baiting. Big thing in New Zealand. And they came in and put on a drama in the midst of all of this. Someone else put up on the wall that they love films, and I wonder whether other people in the community love films and like to get a film club going on a Wednesday afternoon. And the result is that's now a regular weekly occasion. And then there are other people who said, you know, we're into art and crafting, and we'd love to bring our stuff to kind of like show and tell. And that's now become part, and over a dozen people every week bring along different art and craft that they're actually doing. And then someone said, you know what, I'd really love to get a project going where those of us who have surplus fruit and veggies can actually leave it for other people. And so the profits went to build the first fruit and veggie stall that's there, that people who have surplus now are able to leave it for people who could actually benefit from it. Amazing little story of one woman who kind of like realised that part of her own growth was to kind of like exercise those gifts. Needless to say, Emma tells me she's never had to go back to hospital. In fact, now she actually has, in the main city of Greymouth, the lead role in the local library. She's the chief librarian. They've invited her to take on a full-time job. She hasn't worked for over 6 years. But the confidence in getting this going has made a difference. But ultimately, what is it all about? And just in an email that Emma sent me last night, she sent this photo of Colin. And this lovely story. Colin has been coming every week since the first began community. His wife died a few years ago and he lives alone now. He's the first one in the door every week and the one of the last to go. He table hops around the room, chats to everyone. Colin is exactly why I wanted to create a space like community. That's what it's all about. And as for Emma and that kind of like label that gatekeeper put on her, the loony that lives kind of like at the local cop station, well, she has a message for them as well. And really, her experience and that of that community is an incredible example of what community can do when it decides to wrap around people. When it decides that, you know what, the gifts that we have in this community can make things actually happen. And so in closing, can I share with you another friend of mine out of Toronto in Canada? This woman has multiple physical challenges that most of us would never even imagine. But I love what Susan said one day when she said, our purpose is not to help people. Our purpose is to build a different kind of community for all of us. It's what we heard happening there at the Kulbinya Footy Club. And to me, that's what I want to commit the rest of my working. How do we make this type of stuff actually happen? Where we increasingly encourage not so much to and for community, and even this token stuff called with community, but how do we open doors and windows of and by the community themselves? Because unless people are a contributor in the process, we're going nowhere. People can belong and people can have things done for them, but it's not until you feel that my gifts are a benefit to other people and we can see the outcomes of that, do we truly create this thing called community, but above all, create the social connection that is really needed for people to have a meaningful life. Thanks very much.